Welcome back, Sega fans, to the podcast where the soul will never die. It's the Sega guys with me, Dan the Mega Driver, and the BD Joe to my beat, James the Segaholic. How you doing, mate?
BD Joe. Yeah, we go have some fun.
I think I actually texted that to you when we were talking about the show today that we're going to record, didn't I?
Yep.
I think you said we're going to have some fun, and I went, yeah, we gonna have some fun.
Yep. And I didn't even mean that either when I said it, but you did well to come back with it. So I was like, see, too quick for me. First thing in the morning, mate. But I'm very well, mate. How's yourself?
Yeah, very good, mate. Very good. It's been a busy few weeks. Home and work life has been crazy, but we've managed to keep the content train going. Obviously, this is probably going to go out in, I think, March, actually, this one. So we're recording in January at the moment because I know we like to timestamp these. By the time we get to putting this one live, hopefully the weather's warmed up a little bit. And we've got through all these illnesses that seem to be sweeping around, especially around the schools and stuff, us both being parents ourselves. So no, I'm good, mate. Looking forward to getting into today's discussion. Yourself?
I make pretty much the same, just working away, working on some videos in the background. Time of speaking, the Dreamcast racers or driving games. Got to be careful with that because it's not just racers. I was very clever with that. It's Dreamcast driving games part 1 is going great guns. We're 2 days into that and it's absolutely flying. So no, chuff with how that's going. But yeah, we're just working away in the background. We brought Review back. We had the Killing Game show. We're working on, which obviously will be Quake 3 Arena, which will have been out by the time this airs. So it's all go, mate. We've got plenty keeping us going. Lots of stuff that we can't wait to share with you guys in the background as well. So yeah, the content just keeps on coming, mate. Just been great fun. Loads of ideas flowing as well for stuff that we're working on. So this was one again that I think was quite kind of near and dear to as a topic that we're both quite passionate about as well. So yeah, as you alluded to with the the legend will never die and BD Joe. Well, we're going back to the Dreamcast for this episode.
Yeah, and it's quite an interesting angle that we're going to come up on this on because we've talked before, and obviously I think at the time of recording we're getting up to kind of the anniversary of the announcement of its discontinuation again. So that would have been 23 years at the time of recording, which is scary. And we've talked about going through our personal journey from the Dreamcast announcement all the way up until it was launched, and us picking up our import systems back in 1999. But this one was one that you came up with, because there's an awful lot of the Dreamcast is an absolute darling across, the gaming community and social media, and you love it, I love it, and I think why is it so beloved? Was kind of the premise of this one. Why do people remember it so fondly today? And I think it's a good question that we will probably do our best to answer.
Yeah, why does the Dreamcast endure? I think was the way we put the question. But yeah, it's a system that you and I have got a lot of fond memories of. It's a system that I think for a lot of people in the community, if you go even to people like John Linneman, how many people have you heard in the community say it's the first system that they put some of their own money towards?
Yeah.
It's a very, very common theme that you hear with the Dreamcast. So because of that, I think it'll always have a special place just because, we've went from being people who relied on our parents or relatives to get us consoles and games, and all of a sudden we were able to contribute ourselves and this was something that felt truly ours. But what is it about it that makes it so enduring that it's got the tags of the machine that will never die? It still lives on. 2024, even last year as well, a big year for Dreamcast in terms of community content and things like that. So why is the machine so fondly remembered? What is it about it? Is it the games? Is it because it was Sega's last system? Just there's so many angles you could come at it, and hopefully the discussion that we have today, we don't have a lot taken down for this. We're just going to kind of free form it, I think, which is what we do best anyway. And hopefully you enjoy this chat. And again, in the comments in the live chat, while this one's going out, on the Discord for Radio Sega. Start popping your thoughts in there because we'll be active at the time when this goes out. What is it about Dreamcast? Why is it that you still play it today? What is it that you love about it that still resonates today? Just love to hear those thoughts.
Absolutely, mate. And I think I've got some quick notes here just to come at a few different levels. But I think the one that you just mentioned just now, just to kind of flip my notes on their head, is many people's first system that they bought with their own money. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's partly down to the fact that this was at the time a very affordable console. The Saturn launched at £400 to $399. The PlayStation launched at £300 or 299. Infamously, the N64 was about, I think in the UK at least, it was over 300 again before it got the immediate price drop. And the Dreamcast was, it came out and it was immediately affordable. So, and if you're coming from, the fact that gaming, particularly all in the West, was exploding to an extent, particularly after the Mega Drive, and you've got, in the post 8-bit computers, post 8-bit micros era, when we're all starting to get into our consoles, and the Mega Drive was seen as this extremely expensive device that I think a lot of people were getting, at the time, getting for their birthdays or whatever. It was expensive for people at the time, or in comparison to stuff like home computers, it was seen as not as not as feature rich, I would say. So
Mm.
obviously your own story with the Atari ST. When you were waiting for your Mega Drive, you got the ST instead. Um, and it just felt like there's an entire generation of us that the Dreamcast was, the first one where we made the decision. I'm going to put my own money towards this. By the same token, it's also a lot of people's first console, full stop, first Sega console at least. And they have a lot
Mm.
of fond memories that way. And you only have to look at some of the memories around Sonic Adventure and people saying that that was like one of their first games. But for everyone, obviously, it was our last Sega console, full stop. And I think all of that, in a nutshell, makes that side of it, that the fact that it exists in that sort of window for so many people, is part of what makes it special.
Yeah, I think as well, the point you touched on about, being the last Sega console, and you're talking about people's journeys starting on 8-bit computers, working their way through the Mega Drive era, Saturn, whatever. The Dreamcast, I think for many, almost was a bookend to a certain chapter. It was like the culmination of everything that had come before. It was like as if it's almost like a bookend, because as you said there, it was the last Sega console. It was the last time we would have anything different than the trifecta that we have now, of the Nintendo, Sony, Microsoft, that we have just now, that which has become the norm, which a lot of gamers have just grew up with accepting as that's gaming,
Yeah.
those three companies. But I think for us and for many people, it was a kind of bookend. It was a culmination of everything that had come before, of striving to have those arcade games in the home, for settling for ports of certain games that you can see the compromises, and all of a sudden we were getting a system that didn't have many compromises. Okay, there's certain ports which are maligned and were below par. VF3TB takes a lot of beating, Sega Rally 2, rightly so. But when you start looking at the Naomi stuff, when you start looking at the games that were made specifically for Dreamcast, likes of your Res, your Space Channel 5s, your Shenmues, those games really showed what the system could do. And it was like you were stepping away from accepting compromises. Finally, you had a system that was doing everything you had seen in the arcades. And it also brought a lot of firsts as well, especially to the PAL region, which we will get into in due course.
Yeah, you've touched on a very big point that's just kind of come to mind there, mate, which is it really does bookend an era of video gaming, and I don't think many people kind of appreciate that. And yeah, I mean, it does. There's so many transitions that happened during the advent of the Dreamcast. You mentioned the arcade ports there, and to a degree, you kind of have to give Sega Rally 2 and Virtua Fighter 3 TB some slack to a degree, because they were obviously rushed to get them to market. And weren't, if you look at later Model 3 ports such as Sega Bass Fishing and Virtua On, they were much
Mm.
better Model 3 ports. But yeah, the thing, there's the transition there. I mean, we were just we were talking earlier on while we've just bought Review back, and that was playing Quake 3. And yeah, we were in the era where arcade perfect conversions were the norm. All of a sudden we've got arcade perfect games all the time, whereas in the past, Street Fighter 2 on the SNES and Mega Drive, Fatal Fury on the SNES and Mega Drive, all these arcade ports had to have huge compromises. Even Ridge Racer on the PlayStation, Virtua Fighter 2 on the Sega Saturn, all had huge compromises. So the arcade was almost home. But looking at the Quake 3 review, what's very apparent is the shift from the arcade to the PC, which we have now, where the PC is king, where the most high tech games are on PC. And yeah, we are now in this, and it feels like it's awful in a way because we've just got Nintendo, Sony, and Microsoft have been there for 23 years now. It's just been the three of them, battling it out, with Microsoft's being stumbling over itself, and PlayStation being sleek, single vision, especially with its current single player content and focus on kind of story and multimedia, and Nintendo just being Nintendo. And it hasn't changed for 23 years. Whereas if you look at Dreamcast, in that, in the 7 years before that, if you count just after if you just count after the SNES had launched in Europe, you'd had the Jaguar from Atari, you had the Amiga CD32, you had the Panasonic 3DO, Casio brought out a console, Apple brought out a games console. Everyone was trying to get in on it, and now you've just got this very almost sterile kind of face off between the three of them.
Mhm.
You also had Neo Geo as well, making consoles, and 2001, kind of everything changed. Obviously, the Dreamcast was discontinued, but by the same token, SNK pretty much went out of business for a while, and
Mhm.
that whole era it's like a whole chapter of gaming just came to a close at that point. And
Mhm.
then we moved into obviously the rest of the sixth gen, which was Xbox, PlayStation 2, and GameCube, which even those three consoles were phenomenal. But though the Xbox carried on a little bit of the Dreamcast soul, we'd pretty much stepped away from what the Dreamcast was about back then.
Yeah, and it's weird because that's what Peter Moore said as well. And it's a view which, as he said, that Sony very cleverly positioned to customers that the Dreamcast was a transitional product. It wasn't to be considered part of that generation. And I think for a lot of people, I don't think it's seen as a transitional product, but I think it's got this allure about it because it sort of stands alone. It's like people don't recognize it as being like, even though it kind of outshone the PlayStation in terms of like, you had games like Soul Reaver, Legacy of Kain, you had Tomb Raider Last Revelation, V-Rally 2. You had a lot of games that were on PlayStation that came to Dreamcast and they were upscaled, better FPS, more features. But aye, it's an interesting point. It's just that people do see it as a standalone system. Doesn't seem to belong to any generation, even though it technically is part of that sixth gen alongside
Yeah.
GameCube and Xbox and PS2. It was meant to be there, but it does just kind of stand alone on its own right. And I think that's why it gets quite so much attention as well, because it really did. It just, for the fact it burned so bright for such a short time, that it didn't really get to attach itself to a particular battle, so to speak. It sort of fought its own war, really.
Yeah. I mean, in comparison to especially PlayStation 2 and Xbox, it very much was because no other console really had arcade games like the Dreamcast did. And even though Sega had tried to distance themselves from it, there were still there was arcade games and there was the sort of arcade style games. And even Jet Set Radio, is a longish game, but it's still only about 6 hours long. And it's still of a game very much in the spirit of classic Sega.
Mhm.
That's the sort of game that only Sega could make. Whereas on the you didn't really get that from Xbox and PlayStation. You know, Xbox had Halo, and it felt like there was games like you had like Brute Force and Ninja Gaiden, and games that were like kind of, striving for that kind of blockbuster sort of feel, which was very much what PlayStation were also trying to do. And even games like, you had your Tekken Tag and Ridge
Mhm.
Racer 5 on the PS2, but they still did kind of pop, you know. Because if you go into an arcade, obviously we both went to Arcade Club last year, and it's just bright colors, isn't it? And compared to the other consoles, the Dreamcast just felt like it was the brightest. It just popped when you look at it, and that's still true today.
Yeah, it is. If you think all the games, if you put them on, they're loud, they're bold, they're bright. And I again, it was like Sega were just sitting in their own little space between the fifth and sixth gen, just doing their own thing. As you say, like a lot of the kind of experiences I had, like Jet Set Radio is a great example. Try to be original, cell shading, pioneering that kind of visual style, the music that went with that, the gameplay, the tagging mechanics,
Yeah,
aye, everything. And again, that gets back to the point I made at the start. Those original games, it didn't just need the arcade conversions. Those original games, like Jet Set Radio, like Space Channel 5, Shenmue, Res,
Skies of
Cosmic
Arcadia.
Smash, yeah, Skies. There's so many that they tried to be. It's like they tried. As I said it before here, they tried to do their own take on what PlayStation was doing. They tried to appeal to a more, it's a word I hate using. I don't like the whole casual and hardcore gamer thing, but like they were trying to appeal to that more non-Sega audience in a way by trying to. They'd looked at Sony and seen, like, what kind of experiences were they doing, but they also try to put their own spin on it. And some of the unique titles that we got, there's no, like, we've spoken about like titles that only Sega could have done on like Saturn. There's certain titles that could. I mean, we got ports of certain games like Crazy Taxi, for example, went to PlayStation 2, went to GameCube as well, didn't it?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
it did.
The PlayStation 2 version of Crazy Taxi, you talked about colours. The PS2 version is dull.
Yeah,
It's just, it doesn't have that, you said it, that pop. It doesn't have it. The controls are a wee bit heavier as well, I found from memory. I haven't played it in a long time, so it might just been adjusting to a different controller, but I felt that the taxis felt a lot heavier than they did on the Dreamcast. But aye, they just existed in their own little bubble, doing their own little thing. Um, I just a shame that nobody seemed to care beyond that initial first year.
yeah. Everyone was too distracted by the PS2, and I mean, after what happened, kind of with them abandoning the Saturn, leaving a gaping hole in the industry for 18
Mm.
months. There was no Sega presence at all in the West after between what was the last US release? Obviously, Deep Fear was the last European one, but yeah, that was 18 months pretty much until maybe 15 months. But you got no Sega presence, and they come up and they're like, "Oh, buy us rather than PlayStation." You'd be like, well, if you're a casual fan, or if you're a parent looking to buy something for your kid, maybe that puts you off. So I think it wasn't, and we've the whole thing about Sega has been kind of done to death. So we won't retread too much ground here. But there is the issue of consumer confidence, and obviously the people were drawn to the PlayStation, especially with its DVD player. But obviously, the PlayStation 2 has its place, very fondly remembered by the gaming community, no doubt, because everyone had one. It's the highest selling console of all time still, isn't it? I don't think anything's even come close to it. Even the Switch,
Aye.
PS4 looked like it was going to, and then that just slowed down. The Wii looked like it would at some point, and then that slowed down. It seems that the PS2, 155 million or something, isn't
Crazy,
it?
you know.
Insane. Which I think, when you turn that on its head, the fact that the Dreamcast sold less than a 15th of that, less than a 16th actually, and is still so highly regarded and well thought of within the community, really is a testament to how special it really was. But yeah, mate, I think if we switch over to kind of how it changed gaming, what it brought to the table, because Yeah, as you said, some people say that it was kind of an intermediate. It wasn't truly, sixth gen, even though we know it was. But it brought so much to the table that one, nothing was like of similar in the fifth gen. There was nothing like it in the fifth gen. And two, these are things that still kind of endure today, in one way or another, or have been huge at one point. For top of the list that I've got at the moment is kind of HD,
Mm-hmm.
or 480p gaming, or 480p visuals plugged through a VGA port. And when my friend first got his import Dreamcast, he got it with a VGA lead because he had a PC in his bedroom and plugged it into the back of the monitor, and wow. Um, Nothing looked that crisp until we got the Xbox 360, I thought.
I mean, I never had the VGA for the Dreamcast, the VGA box back then. At the time I had the Dreamcast, I had a 443, it was a Toshiba I had at the time, a grey Toshiba that sat on it was a kind of matching stand. The grey bits came down the side. It was a glass
Mm.
door. You opened one side to pull it open at two shelves for your DVD and video player and stuff like that. But I plugging it in by RGB SCART, even into that TV, was mind blown. As I said, we spoke to like John Linneman on X before about how Dreamcast quite cleverly would work in tandem with CRT technology as it was to to maximize its anti-aliasing, to remove any jaggies. But that was the thing that stood out the most, was just the fact there was A, no jaggies, and B, there was no pixelation at all. Everything was just so detailed, so smooth. So if that was the impression I got playing it on a big CRT, like I can't imagine what it must have looked like on a monitor at the time through VGA. That must have been mind blowing.
Yeah, I mean, it was only a small, like probably 15-inch monitor, maybe smaller, but we were playing it, up close. And yeah, I've because the thing was, when I got my own, I had a kind of, I think it was like 19-inch CRT, and that was plugged in via RGB SCART, and the SCART picture was amazing. It was absolutely gorgeous, wasn't it? So even in SCART, it blew everything else out of the water. I even think, because I still plug mine in via RGB SCART, and I've got PS2 down there, and I've got an Xbox, original Xbox, and they both plug in via their original. I've got the original cables, and it's not ideal because they're composite cables plugged into a SCART adapter, but they still look really muggy next to the Dreamcast played on the same display. But then the VGA was just so crisp, and it was kind of like Sonic Adventure, for example, when my friend picked that up, was one of the games my friend picks up, and like the renders on the back of the case were so pin sharp, and it was just like it's the same.
After years of being lied to with the whole picking up a Spectrum game with Amiga screenshots in the back, finally the back of the box matched what you got on the screen. Yes.
Exactly. And yeah, it was gorgeous. But yeah, I've actually got I say I've got a dream. I've got my Power Dreamcast hooked up to my CRT, and I've got my Japanese Dreamcast hooked up via VGA to my monitor, and then I've got my GDMU Dreamcast hooked up via HDMI. And I think the VGA still looks best, albeit I can't capture off VGA, hence the need for a HDMI cable. But all three look great, to be honest. But yeah, I don't think anything looked that sharp until we got to the 360 era.
Mm-hmm. Aye, as I say, never the chance to play it. I've played it on VGA. Like actually bought a VGA cable for the Dreamcast I've got just now. But putting it into like the monitor that I had, it didn't look any different to the Kaiko HDMI. But I think the Kaiko taps into the VGA feed from the Dreamcast, so I guess why probably there wasn't too much a difference. I think
Yeah.
if you're getting back to, because again, you're still putting it into a higher resolution display, so there's still upscaling and whatnot going on. So, like back then, you were dealing with a monitor at a native resolution that the Dreamcast was outputting, so you were getting near pixel for pixel,
Yeah.
performance. But Aye, I mean the game that I always remember, like just I was blown away whenever I played VF3 when I got that, and even Sega Rally 2 and whatnot. But see Soul Calibur, right? I still remember whenever Lizard Man appeared, I could not believe I could see the individual scales on his
Yeah.
kind of obviously his skin. I was like, the level of detail was just ridiculous. Like even on the ground, the stages, the kind of the rocks and the kind of the cracked tiles on the floor and stuff like that. Just the background detail. And I know there's some kind of 2D elements in the further back parts of Soul Calibur stages, but the majority of it is still got 3D in it. So I just that was mind blowing just to see that sheer level of detail. Like you could make out faces, like fighters had faces. Also, you seen like you're always used to like in Celebration kind of screens whenever like your character would celebrate winning a fight. Close up, you would all even the 32X managed to steal the Saturn's faces for
Yeah.
the fighters to celebrate, but the faces that the characters had in their celebration poses after winning a bout was the same faces that they had when you were controlling them. It was like, no, this level of detail is unheard of, and that was the game that I still remember whenever like Sam first seen it as well. The two just looked at each other like, "Can you believe this?" It's like, and that's the thing with Dreamcast games as well. How well do they stand up?
Yeah,
That,
you've got two of the points that I was going to go on to, which is obviously we touched on this already. We all had graphics that met or surpassed what were the top arcade games at the time. Obviously, because we talked about this on the DC25 pod that Virtua Fighter 3 was the benchmark. Well, Virtua Fighter 3 and Model 3 was the benchmark. And yeah, the port of Virtua Fighter 3 wasn't perfect, but then we had Soul Calibur, Dead or Alive 2. Just how good does that game look? And then when you've got the tag mode and they're switching in and out, and that just looks again incredible. And it's some of these still look better than games we see today. And
oh,
that and I think that's another point where kind of it's bookended because you don't see many straight ports of stuff like PS1 games, Sega Saturn games, unless they're like 2D sprite based ones, but not 3D games. Obviously, we had the Metal Gear Solid collection that came out recently, and that got derided. But aside from that, and Super Mario 64 being on the Mario 3D All Stars collection, you don't get many 3D ports from that era at all. But the Dreamcast, you get quite a few. You had the whole Dreamcast collection. You had a
mhm.
load of them come onto the Xbox Live Arcade, and they're not really touched up much because yeah, they still look great today.
Like the Dreamcast collection that had knights on it.
Yeah.
Like, why? It's like that's not on Dreamcast. I wish it had have been. Wish we had got
Oh,
a proper night sequel on Dreamcast. That pinball
I
table in
was going to
Sonic
say
Adventure is absolute torture.
when I first played Sonic Adventure, that was one of the things I was like, oh my god, it's night. We're gonna get a Dreamcast night. Never got one.
Another tease. You can, file that one along with Scud Race with Daytona USA 2. Just put it over there.
Yeah.
But no, you mentioned Dead or Alive 2 as well. And that's still a game that you can put on today and it just like again you could put watch mode on or just let it cycle through its attract modes and it's absolutely amazing. Like also the Japanese version, the limited edition, is got a slightly different intro. They had to censor it because there's a bit with Kasumi or Kasumi's clone, and she's in this kind of clear bubble of liquid, and also she's got nothing on, so they had to censor that. But the rest of it's all exactly as it is. But I just that whole intro, there's so much going on. Like characters being flung off our rooftops and smashed through walls, and then you've got the kind of the storyline elements. It's just unbelievable. One of the Naomi's best games in Dreamcast, as with all Naomi ports, just absolutely crushes it. But I mean, Soul Calibur for many is a kind of like a benchmark visually, but I think there's probably a fair argument I mean, even thinking about it now, would DOA 2 maybe even trump it?
Playing them back to back recently. I don't know if this video, my fighters video, will have aired by the time we air this. Maybe, maybe not. But playing them back to back recently for capture purposes, and I played them both through to credits. Soul Calibur a little bit more because I was doing the mission mode. I thought Dead or Alive 2 is more visually impressive,
Mm.
and Soul Calibur was amazing as one of the launch titles or launch window games, especially when when you compared it to the arcade version or when you compared it to the Virtua Fighter 3. Obviously, it was miles better than arcade. We saw Soul Calibur arcade in Arcade Club, didn't we? And I was like,
That's right.
woo!
I took some pictures of it actually. If I've managed to find them, I'll put them up alongside this as we're talking. But it was eye opening.
It
It
was.
literally it just looked like Tekken 3. It was Tekken 3, and Tekken 3 was a nice looking game at its time, but it goes to show just what a job Namco did, taking that back to the drawing board. You know, Soul Calibur, arguably the first, you know, beyond arcade perfect. I know I've had people come back at me before. I can't remember the name of the game. Somebody came back at me with some shoot 'em up game and said, well, this was actually better than the arcade version. But I think on the sheer scale of which Soul Calibur was redone, fighters, backgrounds, you're adding the mission battle mode in there, all the extra artwork, like everything. I'm sure it's in a Digital Foundry Soul Calibur video as well, and John goes into some details, and I'm sure he compares like the textures on the ground as well. Like they actually look at the arenas that they fight in, and just like the sheer level of detail that they go up on the Dreamcast is absolutely phenomenal. So, but DOA 2 versus Soul Calibur, that might be a video, mate.
Maybe because I thought Soul Calibur you can really tell that although it's visually impressive and built up from the ground up originally built from the ground up to an extent on the Dreamcast, you can still tell its origins as a System 23 game. I think it's System 23. Whereas Dead or Alive was obviously purpose built for Naomi, and it's
Mhm.
so gorgeous. All the there's so much detail in there. It's so clean looking. The backgrounds are pretty much fully 3D. The transitions, when you're kicking people through windows or throwing them over the side, are wonderful. You don't see as much of the 2D art in Soul Calibur. I think especially playing Soul Calibur in the modern day, you notice some of the stuff more like Mitsurugi's, the temple in Mitsurugi's stage. Obviously, that's way far back. Is a very high resolution, but still, when you're looking on a modern display, you can tell that it's pixel art rather than polygon. Whereas DOA just feels born for the Dreamcast. It's a shame, really, that we didn't get more fighting games that were just made for the Dreamcast that were
Mhm.
3D. Because we got that, we got Fighting Vipers, Power Stone, but it's not that's a different sort of game. But yeah, an amazing achievement, I think. And yeah, I'd probably put playing them both back to back this week. Probably put DOA, but taking nothing away from Soul Calibur, and I think it just shows the sheer amount of visually impressive titles that just put you know, kind of put one of the final nails in the coffin for the arcade at the time, because it was the arcade was where you went for the cutting edge of technology, and now it's at home.
Aye, in a £200 box under your TV. You know what I mean? It was just mental. Like I said that in the VF3 video that I did about Genki doing a good job. It was like, how much was a Model 3 arcade at the time? It was like, was it 20 grand or something? This is a
Yeah,
£200 box. You know what I mean? Doing as close as damn to it as possible. Mental. But I mean, the Dreamcast, it's not just the arcade ports that we spoke about. Like you look at the Sonic Adventure 2, just
yeah,
to pull one off the top of my head, that first stage, he drops out the helicopter, is going down all the kind of the kind of San Francisco style
yeah.
steep hills
City
and
Escape,
on.
yeah,
Yeah, it's just unbelievable. Even if you look at Sonic Adventure One, the scene everybody talks about, the killer whale, the wood raft thrashing away as it's all breaking apart. Just so much going on. So, aye, there's not many Dreamcast games that you can put on today and go, oh, that looks bad. There's like it's just such a visually impressive system. As you say, again, that word, that bookend, it just seems to start, it ends and starts a certain era of gaming on its own.
Yeah.
It's like a kind of crossover point, like a handing of the baton almost. It's like, right, gaming, go forward. I've shown you the way. Go on without me.
Yeah, Sonic Adventure 2 is especially impressive, not only because it's made by a tiny team compared to the first game, but it actually runs at 60 frames per second compared to,
Mm-hmm.
to the 30 frames per second of the first game. And there's a lot more kind of complexity in the level design, so it's amazing. But it does, and I think it's probably, in talks of handing the baton over and pushing the industry forward. I think the next point I wanted to make on here was it was online ready out of the box, £200. Obviously, you have to, put your Dream CD in there. You plug in your modem. You pay what was it, a penny a minute, 2 penny a minute back in the day or whatever, and you were online, web browser and everything, and that was amazing. And again, I'm talking about Quake 3 again because it's fresh in the memory. The fact that Quake 3 came to Dreamcast in the state that it was. You think about when PC ports came to stuff like the N64 or the PlayStation, and at the time the PC ports were quite a lot or older than the consoles themselves. Like you look at Duke Nukem on the N64 or Doom on the N64. If they were younger, then there was huge compromises, and there were compromises to Quake being on Dreamcast, but not only did you have a great port on Dreamcast that ran really well and had textures that were in some places better than on the PC, it had 4-player split screen support. You know, the specs for a PC that could match that could run Quake 3 Arena were far in excess of what a Dreamcast could do, but cost about 5 or 6 times as much in order to get it to run. And that's if you had your modem and your graphics card with enough VRAM and enough RAM and the right CPU. And the Dreamcast was ready to run this straight out the box and supported mouse and keyboard. So you could
Yep.
play your mouse and keyboard and play Quake. The way can't afford a £1,000 PC back in 1999. Don't worry, you can play it on your £200 Dreamcast. And do you want to play with your PC friends? Well, don't worry because there's a patch that PC gamers can download and actually download Dreamcast mats and play cross-play. Again, how far ahead of its time was this? I mean, we're only just getting to it's only now that cross-play is so popular across all
Mm-hmm.
platforms.
Yep.
The Dreamcast was doing it back in 1999, 2000. It's absolutely mind-boggling how far ahead of its time this little box was.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, obviously, we had stuff with the Saturn with the NetLink.
Yeah.
That where Sega tried to do it before, but that was an attachment you had to buy and plug into your cartridge slot. As you say, Dreamcast out the box. A lot of people always kind of say, oh, well, if Dreamcast had DVD, it would have survived, and the decision was made. People, you see folk going online saying, if I could go back in time, I would tell them to drop the modem and go with a DVD player. But, what Dreamcast did, as you say, you're buying that, you're taking it home, it's there. No extra hardware required. Just plug your telephone cable in. I was talking to Jason earlier on, and he was saying he only ever played one Dreamcast game online, and it was Quake 3 Arena. And he got to play it once and never again after his mum seen the phone bill. So I'm sure a penny a minute. I mean, as I say, my uncle got a PAL Dreamcast, and that's whenever I experienced the kind of online aspect of it, and it was quite good because it did feel really exciting. Because, as I say, I'd had my Japanese console for that length of time, and it was totally offline. But I'd no interest in taking it online. I knew there was online aspects to it, but I didn't care. I just wanted it was arcade ports. I wanted the best arcade ports. I had to have that system for that. But when he got the PAL system, and plugging it in and loading the Dream Arena CD, it was like a whole. It felt like a different version of the console I'd been playing.
Yeah.
It's like the PAL system just felt so different because of that online, and it was amazing loading up a web browser on your console, and like he went to full hog. He got the mouse and it was crazy sitting in a room like on the floor with a mouse and keyboard. I'm like, what is this? And like the PC I had for uni at the time was. Well, was it? It was was that? I was just getting into uni, just finished college, 99. So it was literally like I had the original Voodoo 2 graphics card in it that came with the MotoGP demo. So like I was playing nothing like was on this. Like the games that you were seeing on like Dreamcast going online, my PC was never running those. But here you had this little £200 box, doing email, web browsing, online gaming, and Quake 3 Arena. Visually, again, we spoke about it holds up really well. It's still a really good looking game. The maps are again top, like you said. You know, the weapons are they're beefy, the sound effects are great. That kind of rock soundtrack that goes with it as well. It's just absolutely brilliant. There's no real great single player content for it, which is a shame. Because you know yourself, like Quake 1 and Quake 2 had story
Yeah,
single player kind of stuff in there, but Quake 3 Arena, as the name suggests, it was like the Unreal Tournament style format. It was all based on taking on people online. The single player mode was pretty much a training
yeah,
mode to get playing bots that were replicating what a human would do quite badly in some points. But even with a controller, it was serviceable. At some points, you'll get a wee bit confused and you'll fire the analog stick up and your rocket launcher will go flying away up in the air. But um, and the Dreamcast was quite clever in its controls and that it used the kind of four A, B, X, Y buttons as forward, back, left, and right. And the
yeah,
stick was to look around and aim. The Half-Life port as well that obviously never got released, but there's plenty of builds out there to pick from and play that used a similar control method. And for the most part, it works quite well. But again, you're getting a modem out the box and you've got a mouse and a keyboard. It was again blurring the lines between console and PC.
yeah. Blurring the lines and uniting the communities. And there was
Mhm.
a lot of PC. Obviously, if you didn't have a mouse and keyboard, it was tough. But I mean, I didn't get on. Obviously, I was like you, mate. And we both imported our Dreamcasts, and I've said before how the first PAL game I bought was Shenmue. I had to get a DCX CD to actually play that on my Japanese Dreamcast, and it wasn't till it would have been kind of late 2000 when I think I picked up it was at the time it was a broken Power Dreamcast where the controller board had fried. I got that pretty cheap. I think I got it from a friend actually. They were getting rid of it because the controller board had died. I said, "I'll have it off you." Fixed it up. I was soldering the transistor in to fix it. I think it's one of these ones that I've got here actually, and that's where I ended up with a Power Dreamcast, which I finally took online and played Quake 3. It was a CDR version of Quake 3 though, but
You helped kill it. You helped.
um, Fantasy Star Online, which was a legit version, which I did buy for Sonic Adventure 2, and then got hooked on that because that was fantastic. And the stuff that game did. I mean, that was an MMO on a console at the time. Again, unheard of. And I don't know how much you played it in the back in the day, but it had you could type in stuff on the keyboard or on your
Mm,
Dreamcast keyboard, but it also had that kind of phrase selector. So if you're
that's right.
playing with people with different languages, you'd select the phrases, you could put them together, and then it would translate them into whatever their native language was. Which, God, there's nothing like that these days. So the stuff it was doing was unbelievable. And then it had kind of voice chat too, albeit fairly limited by comparison. It wasn't like Xbox Live, where voice chat was from, but it was the default basically. But yeah, it did all that. Voice chat aside, did that out of the box. Even the Xbox Live. I mean, remember when I got my Xbox and there was an Ethernet port in the back. So we had to wait a few years for the actual Xbox Live starter packs to come out and for us to actually be able to get online. Dreamcast was there day one.
I mean, Fantasy Star Online's a game that if I could go back and tell myself to actually commit to, because again, it was a game that it didn't appeal to me. But looking back at it, I kind of feel like I did miss out just that whole kind of community and everything about it. I just wish I could have, actually went back and enjoyed it. You know what I mean? I'd have loved to have actually played that one.
Yeah, I mean, I love Fantasy Star Online. I've spent so many hours into it. And thankfully, by the time I was playing Dreamcast Online, you could get a couple of ISPs. I think FreeServe was the one that we were using, where you pay the monthly fee and then you can just use it as much as you want. So I wasn't racking up enormous phone bills at that time. But yeah, but I think hundreds of hours into that, and then put hundreds of hours into the Xbox version when that came out. But it did all this. Choo Choo Rocket, the free game that it ga- that it's that was given away. The online leaderboards that are out there, downloadable content. You had the Sonic Adventure downloadable content,
Hmm.
the Christmas pack, and all that sort of stuff. And obviously, yeah. You say DLC, the Dreamcast DLC, and there's probably a bunch of people saying it was the Dreamcast fault. That's why we've got horse armor, and that's why checking characters cost £11. Blah blah blah. But at the time, this was a new frontier, and it was new and it was exciting, and it all started with this tiny little white console.
I mean, the DLC you got on Dreamcast was literally like an extra level or like something to add into a save file or like the chows
It had to
and
fit on the
so
VMU after all.
exactly. So there's no they were like a mega, not even a meg, probably like a couple of bytes or something at most, a couple of
Yeah.
100 bytes or whatever. But I again, it's just I don't think for a minute we can say the Dreamcast is to blame for you know multiple character packs on the new Mortal
I
Kombat or
think I
anything like
think it
that.
was all free pretty much on the Dreamcast, wasn't it? I don't remember there being much paid, if any,
No,
paid content on there.
no, I don't remember. I mean, again, I've not explored all of the DLC on it, so there might be something out there that was paid. But I think for the most part, it was all just free downloads, you know. But aye, like the Sonic Adventure one comes to mind. That was like a big thing because remember, like Tamagotchis were like proper huge at one point.
Yeah.
Like I was like, several years above the kids that were infatuated with those things in like high school. Like, oh no, I've not fed it; it's going to die. But it's like, but you had your own kind of felt like a more not mature, but a more proper gaming related version. With the Sonic Adventure.
Yeah.
The is it the Chows or
The chows, yeah.
Chaos? So.
But then that comes on to another point I've got on here, which is second screen gaming. Obviously, the VMU. No, second screen gaming isn't the biggest, the most prominent thing in gaming today. But we had the Nintendo DS, we had the Wii U, and the idea of plugging a device in and then taking a version of that around with you is something that followed on from not just the Dreamcast, but the PSP connection to the PS3, the Vita connection to the PS4, the GBA connecting to the Nintendo GameCube, and not only did you have the VMU. In fact, I've got a stack of them right here. I've got like a few props with me. Got a VMU, got another VMU. Not only did you have these guys that would slot together, but you also had the Neo Geo Pocket Color, or I think the Neo Geo Pocket itself actually connected to the Dreamcast as well. So
Mhm. There was a cable for it, aye.
yeah, and that predates any other console connection. Obviously, there was the Game Boy, Super Game Boy that came to the Super Nintendo, but it wasn't anything like this where you'd take stuff that you'd take your game data and make it almost portable. You take your Chow from your Sonic Adventure save, and you'd pick him up. Sonic could pick him up, walk him over, drop him in the the controller, which had the VMU slot on there, and
That's
then
right.
take that away. As long as you've got two double A's in your not two double A's, two TR2032 batteries in your VMU, you can play a couple of Chow mini games, stick it back into Alan Sonic Adventure, and put your popular Chow back out again. It's amazing when you think about it. Just the sheer creativity that
Aye.
went behind that, and just the innovation and the foresight. And even though, as I say, second screen gaming isn't massive, it was pretty fantastic and pretty mind blowing at the time.
Yeah, and it was the way that they made certain games utilize it as well. It's like, oh, Soul Calibur did nothing interactive wise apart from your character had its own little kind of mini version that would be doing moves on the screen at the same time as you were fighting. But you had stuff like Resident Evil Code Veronica that would show like your health or your
Yeah.
ammo. Virtua Tennis is hilarious. It literally see if you want, you can play your match looking at the VMU.
Yeah.
You're controlling a stick version of yourself, but you can see the wee ball going over the net,
Yeah.
and you can't actually play it. But like the one that gets me was at one of the NFL, the 2K games. Excuse me. Like you could pick your plays. I'm sure you could pick your plays on the VMU. Now, how many times playing an American sports game with friends did you like? You would always go like that. Like, because remember you had like on like Madden, you had like ABC.
Yeah.
So you'd be hiding the controller away so they couldn't see what you were picking. Like, they didn't worry about that in the Dreamcast because they could see your screen. You could just,
Yeah.
you were so just wee things like that they tried to make even the game experience a bit more different than what you'd already experienced. And I remember again the big the big kick up about it at the time whenever it was unveiled. It was they made a really big deal about it, like detachable, not so much detachable memory cards because obviously PS1 had done that before, but an interactive memory card.
Yeah.
It was almost described as being its own kind of like a mini console of its own. It didn't quite come to the kind of levels that I think the hype at the time made it out to be, that it would have its own games and
Yeah.
take the Dreamcast experience with you on the go and stuff like that. I'm like, it's not going to quite do that. But what it did still end up doing, it did enhance the games that developers were clever enough to kind of think, right, what we kind of, tweaks and kind of little kind of things can we do with it to just make that experience a wee bit different.
Yeah, because yeah, and I think everyone was kind of thinking, oh, it's a tiny little Game Boy that you're getting with your Dreamcast, and it
Mm.
was more like the games on it are more like the sort of stuff that you'd get on your Nokias like a year or two later. um,
Snake.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Um, but it was still kind of phenomenal and kind of mind blowing, and obviously PlayStation scrambled around and pulled out their own version, which was released and kind of did absolutely nothing. I think Street Fighter Alpha 3 supported it and nothing else. And then the Pocket Station was quietly forgotten and shuffled out, and we never saw a
Mm.
version for the PS2. But the VMU for the Dreamcast is part of its identity, I think. And you know, it's something that's still unique to the Dreamcast. I mean, and it was the VMUs at the time, they weren't expensive. They were pretty much typical memory card costs, weren't they? Maybe that was
Mm.
another one of the reasons why the Sega were losing money, because they probably should have been charging a bit more for a device with a screen and a speaker on it. But again, yeah, it's part of the Dreamcast identity, and it's still unique to this day. I mean, you could get 4 players could get a VMU each. It's not like a Wii U gamepad where one player has it. It's not like a DS where it's a solo experience. The only thing that comes close to it is connecting 4 Game Boy Advances to a GameCube for what is it, Zelda Four Swords Adventure, which that's great. But not many games do that, and getting that set up is outrageously expensive, and even was at the time. You can still have 4 players playing virtual tennis with the little tennis thing on the screen, or playing, NFL 2K with their plays coming up. So it's amazing, to be honest. And I thought it was amazing when it was unveiled. I still think it's pretty amazing now, even though it didn't quite catch on as Sega might have wanted it to.
Aye, I mean, you said it's part of the Dreamcast identity. You're damn right it is, because how many of us right now are sitting going beep? In fact, was it Carl Lavery on X that did an experiment? And like, if you put brand new CR2032s in your VMU and you set the time and everything, the batteries die like that. Like they'll last like a week or something if you're
Yeah.
lucky. But see if you leave it on the actual setting screen that don't actually set a time. Sure, he said he got 30 odd days. So 30 days of beep free gaming on your Dreamcast. But it was like, aye, I wouldn't mind actually trying that, you see, because I've given up putting new batteries in mine because they're not expensive, but they're a pain in the backside unscrewing that wee stupid tiny screw in the back and
Yeah.
getting into them. But the Dreamcast gives it away whenever you try and sneak a wee shot late at night. Everybody's in their bed. You power it on, it just screams at you.
I know, and yeah, the reason why I've got so many, I've got six sitting up there. And the reason why I've got so many is I was trying to find my Marvel versus Capcom 2 save file, and I couldn't find which memory card it was on. So it was like beep boop boop boop. No, it's not on that one. Beep boop boop boop. No, it's not on that one. Beep. It was just like over and over again.
I know, but even the menu for the Dreamcast as well, the whole interface, like whenever you get into like choose your saves, and just it's all very pleasant, Ring, and it's just it's all very very nice. But the UI for the memory management system was absolutely gorgeous. You could select like custom icons,
Yeah.
to be shown as well. I think at one point, I think was it Power Stone, like you actually set a Capcom logo as your actual default VMU screen as well. So it's just they never got to do, I think, what the original plan for it was, or maybe developers' ideas outstripped what it was capable of, possibly. But what it did still do, it's just got a nice charm to it. Just looking down at your screen on your controller and just seeing whether it's Killick, a wee cartoon version of Killick, or Mitsurugi going through their motions, or your health on Code Veronica, tennis players on Virtua Tennis. It's a nice novelty feature that
Yeah.
just, as you say, it does form part of that identity.
I think in a if all was right with the world, mate, there would be a version of Monster Hunter that Capcom premiered on the Dreamcast, Monster Hunter, which is a phenomenon worldwide now, but massive in Japan originally. And it would follow that Sonic Adventure template where you catch your monsters online, or you catch
Oh,
your monsters in the game. You download a monster to your VMU and you battle them out in public or trade them with your friends by plugging your VMU in, and that would have been, you know, if all was right, then that would have made the Dreamcast sell like nothing else in Japan. But unfortunately, it didn't quite manifest that way. But there we go. But
what could have been, mate? What could have been?
what could have been? And yeah, so I mean, there's loads of other ways to innovate. You had the fishing rod for get bass. I always called it get bass. Obviously, over in the West, it's Sega Bass Fishing, but I own it as get bass. I always know it as get bass. Which kind of brings us on to kind of what I was thinking of, which was games that are still best played on Dreamcast. And I think more than most Sega consoles, Dreamcast games have probably had the most ports to subsequent systems, whether it was
Mhm.
systems that generation, such as the PS2, GameCube, and Xbox, or whether it was games generations after, like the Xbox 360 of the modern day. Obviously, you could maybe make an argument that the Mega Drives had a number of ports, but they've always been emulated. They haven't been actually actual ports.
Mhm.
But these are games that I think are still best played on Dreamcast. So Bass Fishing, I think, you had the Wii version where you can do it with the nunchuck or the motion controls, but nothing beats
Aye.
having that rod. And we touched on Crazy Taxi, mate. As I say, when I first got my PS2, and I've told this story many times, we got it fairly cheap because someone was selling it, and they were selling it, and the only game with it was Crazy Taxi. So me and my brother went halves. I think it was the PS2 was £300 at the time. We got it for £180, £90 each. Came with just Crazy Taxi. I put it on in the big telly downstairs and was just like, "What is this? What have you?" And and I was going to mention this earlier. The thing that stands out, we're talking about BD Joe. Yeah, we're going to have some fun. But in the PS2 version and every version that comes after, it's like, yeah, we're going to have some fun. And the voice acting is completely different. And it's just things like that. The identity and the visuals and the color doesn't pop as much. And the identity and the handling just all feels wrong in that
Yeah,
version.
yeah. And I've said before, Crazy Taxi for me is the game that embodies the spirit of Dreamcast. I just like again, I've seen criticisms of people who choose Crazy Taxi as their favorite Dreamcast game. It's a lazy option or a lazy choice, or it's a cop out choice. There's better on the system, but it's not just in terms of like the gameplay. It's just everything about it. I just think it totally captures that era, like the music, the brands that are in it, just everything about that game just perfectly encapsulates that kind of 2.5 year spell when Dreamcast was current. And the fact it's a damn good game, a very deep game, a deceptively deep game, lots to it in terms of moves that you can learn. We've spoken before about Sega arcade games with the scored mechanics. We spoke to Dave and Peter from Shiro about it. It's a classic Sega arcade game trait. You can pick a Sega game up from the arcade and you can play it and have fun with it. But if you learn it and you learn all the little tricks that they've left in there for you to find, you can all of a sudden find yourself becoming better and better, racking up special moves, combos, and that's what Crazy Taxi does so well. And whenever I'd sold on my Dreamcast and all my Sega stuff and moved on, and eventually like Crazy Taxi would like come to Xbox 360 on Xbox Live Arcade, and it was weird because obviously the soundtrack was removed, the branding was removed for like no Pizza Hut, no Fila store, no Tower Records, and it sounds daft, right? Like, why would a customer saying the name of a brand have any impact? But take me to the Fila store. I want to go to Tower Records, all this kind of stuff. It was like everything about it just embodies that era just so perfectly. And the fact that it's a damn good game, a deep game as well, just makes it all the better. So for me, like I had it on iOS as well, and the iOS port is actually it's decent. And if I remember, the soundtrack is in it, but it's only got a drive and reverse button. There's no way to change gears on it, so you don't even get you literally can't do half of the special moves on it.
Yeah.
If I remember, you had to double tap drive quickly to do a crazy dash. If I remember, looked great, but again, there's just something about playing that game on a Dreamcast that's just so special. It just belongs there. It just feels right there. Whenever you're playing Crazy Taxi and it's a Dreamcast controller in your hand, it just melts into your hand. It just feels right.
Yeah.
That's the way it should be played. So, that's definitely one. Sorry, but a pure crazy taxi love tangent there.
That's what we're here for, mate. That's what we're here for.
Oh,
But my theory on this is, and I've got a few more games on this list, and I'll come on to another one in a second. But Sega are a lot like Nintendo in that, and I don't think this is true of PlayStation and Xbox, especially Xbox, and I think it's true of PlayStation as well. But I feel like Nintendo and Sega, and in this case, we're going to use Crazy Taxi as an example here, tailor and fine tune their games and their gaming experiences to the hardware and controllers that you're using. So,
mm,
Crazy Taxi, Sega Rally is a great example of this as well, as we both know. Crazy Taxi would have been obviously it was Naomi first, and it would have been built with the steering wheel in mind. But when they brought that home, they would have tailored that to the Dreamcast controller. And the Dreamcast,
mhm.
as much as flack as the Dreamcast controller gets sometimes, some of it deserves, some of it unfairly. It's perfect for Crazy Taxi, and no other controller feels quite right. And the reason why I think that feels so right for Crazy Taxi is because that port was made specifically to the finest detail to how much you pull down your accelerator triggers, how much dead zone, or how the indentations and how much analog steering there is. Everything is absolutely fine tuned to the Dreamcast. When it came elsewhere, it was kind of there's the experience, we'll get it out kind of. And I don't know if it's a thing about care, because obviously once you come to the PlayStation 2, I don't feel that the sticks are quite as good as the Dreamcast stick, even though on the whole Dreamcast, the DualShock is a more versatile controller, but I don't think it has sticks. There's always been an amount of dead zone in PlayStation sticks all the way up to the PS4 that has not felt right to me. Um, and I don't think these games have been tailored for the consoles they're on. And you look at today, today you're not just Xbox aren't making a game for the Xbox Series X and S. they're making it for PC as well, and PC players are going to be using not necessarily an Xbox controller. They're going to be using mouse and keyboard. They might be using the DualShock or a DualSense. And that's kind of true for the PlayStation as well. They've got all these different controller options as well. And I don't think there's exceptions. There's games like Astro's Playroom on the PS5, which that's built with the haptic feedback in mind. And that using that example, actually, that is a phenomenal game to play because it really drills down on that console strengths. But if you look at games like The Last of Us, you look at games like Gears of War, even Halo, the original Halo feels amazing still on the Xbox.
Mm-hmm.
Halo Infinite feels good, but it's a game that has been designed for console and PC at the time. So coming back to my original point, the reason why so many of these games feel so good on Dreamcast and not as good everywhere else is because they were fine-tuned for that controller. Same as for Sonic Adventure. Sonic Adventure still feels absolutely phenomenal on the Dreamcast. And yeah, it's a 30 frames per second game, which some people might balk at. But to be honest, it's one of the best, most responsive 30 frames per second games. I don't even notice it. I didn't even know it was 30 frames per second until a few years ago. It looks and feels so smooth. It's in fact the GameCube version that came after, which was the remaster. It said, right, let's put the FPS limit at 60, and then it drops to like 40 in like the whale chase and all those sequences, where all of a sudden it's the GameCube version that feels janky and juddery and
Mm-hmm.
messy and introduces all these bugs. And I've been on a rant before about how Sonic Adventure DX is an atrocious version of Sonic Adventure. And if that's the only version of Sonic Adventure that anyone's played, then do yourselves a favor and either emulate the Dreamcast port or get the Steam version and get the Dreamcast restoration pack. Or best thing to do, buy a Sega Dreamcast and play it as originally intended because it's absolutely night and day. But yeah, I mean that's my thoughts on it, mate. Is that these had that kind of Nintendo level of fine tuning and quality, and yeah, they didn't quite get. I think Nintendo wouldn't rush games out the way that Sega could do it. Nintendo wouldn't give us a version of Virtua Fighter 3 or Sega Rally 2 and what we got in the end.
Aye.
But by the same token, Sega was still, as they'd always done, from Sonic the Hedgehog to Streets of Rage, to arcade games like Sega Rally, Virtua Fighter. You know, how many times Daytona USA? How many times have we said that sure, there's compromises here, but this game plays amazing, or this game plays just like the arcade, and it's true for all of these as well.
Mm-hmm. No, that's a fair point. Yeah. If you look across the games that we're spoken about, Sega Rally on the Saturn built from the ground up to take advantage of that particular system's strengths and weaknesses to give the best possible experience. Yeah, Daytona USA on Saturn doesn't play the best in terms of frame rate, but it feels like the arcade handling. And yeah, Crazy Taxi, as I said, absolutely just that controller just melts into your hand. It just what you said about the sticks as well. The Dreamcast analog stick for me is the biggest strength of the controller.
Yeah, I'd agree.
It's a smaller iteration of what came in the Saturn 3D controller, similar technology used. The PlayStation, the DualShock 2 that was in that. Yeah, I mean, even I'm sitting here doing that just now, there was a lot of movement in them. They'd a far greater range of movement on them. But they were also a lot looser, I felt as well. They did feel particularly loose. And perhaps that's what contributed to that kind of heavier feeling that again with the Dreamcast analog stick, you can almost twitch control the cabs.
Yeah.
It's quite funny as well because I never realised, but reading the kind of synopsis of the characters, obviously Axel's the kind of all rounder. Gus, heavier cab, just batters through things, but he's slower. Gina's meant to be like the kind of the fastest. She's got the best straight line speed. And BD Joe is apparently the hardest to control.
Oh, really?
And he's my go-to.
Yeah, he's mine as well.
It always has been. And I can flick that cab in and out of traffic to rack up, crazy through combos, no bother with that Dreamcast controller. But when I tried it on the Xbox 360 or the Xbox One, or when I had the Series X or S, like on that and Xbox analog sticks, I feel are slightly stiffer as they went on. And through each generation, I feel as if the Xbox, the 360 controller is still the best Xbox controller for me. But Crazy Taxi on them again, I couldn't quite. The muscle memory wasn't there. I couldn't quite find myself, flicking the cab in between
Yeah.
the cars, the traffic. So yeah, it is. And what you said, they're Sega and Nintendo coming from that kind of old school philosophy, I think, of just making sure that their games played best on their hardware.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I think that's true for a lot of these. F355 Challenge, another one that looks and plays best on Dreamcast. Incredible game. With online as well, which I think was missing from the PS2 version. I think it was, at least anyway.
Yeah.
Virtual On, still think that's still the best version of Virtual On. Of course, because you can get the twin sticks on the Dreamcast as well. House of the Dead 2 is another one I've got on here. You can get that in a few places, I think, but you can get
Mhm.
it on the Wii to play, but it's not quite right with the Wii Zapper. It's obviously you can play it on a modern display, which is a bit of a boom, but playing on a CRT with the original Dreamcast gun, that's the way to play. I think there's probably loads more there, absolutely loads more. Marvel versus Capcom 2 is another one. Um, you know, a few things have been said about the ports of kind of Street Fighter Alpha 3 and Street Fighter 3 Third Strike on Dreamcast, but the games that were built for Dreamcast, Capcom versus SNK 2, Marvel versus
Oh,
Capcom 2,
what a game, man.
oh, the two of them are amazing. They're still best played on the Dreamcast. So yeah, the
All
list is
records are made to be broken. Sorry, I just had to keep rocking, baby.
oh, it's so good. It's so good. Um, but yeah, and that's Capcom vs SNK 2 is another one that had crossplay, and that was crossplay with the PS2
Mhm.
of all games. So yeah, a game that's still best played on the Dreamcast, but you might want to get a stick for that. But even the Dreamcast stick was amazing. If you've got one of those,
Oh,
you're
man.
laughing.
Thing as well with the Dreamcast stick, it did everything. It righted everything that the Saturn arcade stick, the Virtua stick in the West got wrong because the Japanese Virtua stick is micro switched,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
the Western one feels like a cheap Amiga stick. It really
It's
does.
atrocious.
It's horrid. It's just there's nothing in it. There's no micro switches on any of the buttons or the stick. It just feels like a horrible. It's just
Spongy.
spongy, hard to move. There's no inclination of where you're actually putting the direction on it. It's just nah. Um, but I just very quickly wanted to go back to F355 challenge as well because by the time this goes out, Dreamcast Racers Part 2 will have been out, and F355 is obviously in that top five. And one of the things about the PS2 version of F355 is that it runs at a lower resolution than the Dreamcast version, and the lighting system is severely simplified. So the sunsets and the kind of the beautiful lighting that you get is completely removed compared to the Dreamcast version. Although the PS2 version did get a third person view as well. Now, I don't know if that was to help. I don't, was there any criticisms that I don't ever remember hearing people
No,
moan
I
that
don't.
F355 didn't have a third person view, but I noticed that was in the PS2 version.
Yeah, I don't own the PS2 version of that. I've got quite a few of them, but I don't own the PS2 version. But yeah, it ran at a lower resolution, and Quake 3 is still possibly the best console port and Dreamcast of that era as well. And the visual quality of Quake 3 PS2 version ran at 60 frames per second, but the Dreamcast version was, yes, it was running at half the frame rate, but it was solid. But it had so much more graphical detail, so many more lighting effects. I mean, there's some parts where the PS2 version looks horrid, and I know John Linneman's a big fan of the PS2 look, and I'm sorry, John, but hugely disagree there. PS2 visuals have always looked kind of muddy and fuzzy, um, and I think it's because I got so used to that pin sharp Dreamcast look. But any game that was on both systems, there's very rarely that I'd pick, the PS2 version over it. Even
Yeah,
stuff that wasn't released, like Half-Life, and I know Half-Life has got its frame rate issues in the build that's out there, but it's still a great looking port.
aye. And I know, like, as we say, John, you know, love John. Loads of time for John. We're a great guest on here. And I know he's a massive PS2 fan. and he does champion like, if you hook up PS2 to a really good CRT, that it really does sing. And one of the interesting things I've noticed people saying, not this isn't like a John cause, it's other people talking. We talked to John about the Jaggies,
Yeah.
right? And he said that the Jaggies it looked so sharp, and I noticed that there's this kind of like shift that Jaggies are now seen as sharpness. But trust me, back in the day, no one's seen Jaggies as sharpness. It
No.
was like it was. But you look at the Dead or Alive 2, which again I remember I picked up during my break whenever I worked for Safeway as a student. I worked nights after uni, and as I say, you used to get paid in cash, and I got my pay, and I went across and right across the road in the industrial estate from the Safeway I worked in. There was a Curry's, and I went in there, and again at that time looking for anything new for my PS2. I was Dead or Alive Ultimate. It was Dead or Alive Ultimate. It was called. And I picked it up and I took it home. And I had it on the Dreamcast already, the Japanese version. I had it for a while.
Had
And
the extra content in the PS2 version though. Even
yeah,
not so much the characters if you've got the plus version on Dreamcast, but the extra stages.
yeah. Um, but I put it on. I couldn't believe the lighting was better. There were like the lighting effects. Like whenever you were like making contact, there was like nicer kind of
It
lighting
sparks.
effects, yeah, that kind of stuff. But in the main, it was jaggier, it was duller. Like the actual palette, like Kasumi's blue in her costume didn't quite, again, that word pop the way it did in the
Mm.
Dreamcast. And it was just quite stark. I mean, for me, PS2 didn't truly come into its own until that kind of Metal Gear Solid 2, Gran Turismo 3. Like
Yeah.
Gran Turismo 3 was that was that and Metal Gear Solid 2 were like the oh shit moments on like, oh right, that's what Sony were talking about. Oh right, okay. But Dead or Alive 2 most certainly um wasn't as impressive as it was on Dreamcast.
No, no, I agree. I had the PS2 version first actually. I didn't actually get it on Dreamcast until a few years back. So and the difference is stark. It's just not as flashy on the PS2. But yeah, there's a load of games on there that definitely the Dreamcast is the place to play them. Even I'd argue things like the original Shenmue games probably still best on Dreamcast. If you play it on if you play the modern HD remasters, they're quite limited, especially the fact that there's a lot of like the cutscenes are bordered off on the sides, whereas on Dreamcast, obviously you're getting it in its true original aspect ratio. The Xbox added a few things to Shenmue 2, which you can take or leave. But the original experience is still, in my opinion, best played
Mm.
on the Dreamcast.
That's again, Shenmue games fall into the same category as like Crazy Taxi. Like
Yeah,
they have their soul on Dreamcast, and it might
yeah.
sound again, well, what's your wish, James? Just it's sentimental nonsense, but it just feels intrinsically tied to that system. It just feels like you hear that orchestral main theme, you hear it on Dreamcast, it's like it just gets you right in the feels. It just belongs on there,
But mate,
and
we're in the gaming community and the industry as a whole, and gamers, retro gamers specifically, have created entire marketplaces dedicated to playing original games and original hardware. And even we're get at the point now where you can download the ROMs and you can play the ROMs, but you won't play them on the PC. You will play them on original hardware via Everdrives or ODEs. Because why? Because they're meant to be played on that hardware. So it's not just us romanticized about it. I think it's a proven fact. These games are
mhm,
best played on this hardware.
yeah, and Shenmue and Dreamcast, just they do just go hand in hand. Um, as many other experiences do in other games that you mentioned as well, that Virtual On, Oratorio, Tangram. Now, this is something I spoke to Dave about as well. Um, Not quite as good, in my opinion, as Virtual On the Saturn. I think the first game is better, but again, just that's definitely one of the better Model 3 ports on Dreamcast. Like it's impressive, in its own right.
Yeah,
It's brilliant port.
I think the shortcomings, the reason why I enjoy Virtual Cyber Troopers compared to Toy Tangram is nothing to do with the port. I think it's just the that I prefer the original arcade game
Mm.
compared to the sequel. It's nothing to do with the port, I don't think. Although I think the sequel was actually much more revered in Japan, and I think that was one of the biggest selling Dreamcast games. But again, still, in my opinion, best played on Dreamcast. But as I say, man, we could read off like loads and loads of these. You know, even games that weren't by Sega. You know, stuff like Soul Calibur. You know, that came to Xbox Live Arcade, came to iOS. As you know, shared your Facebook memory earlier in the
Yes,
week
that's it. Yep,
with the guy commenting on the bus.
yep,
And yeah, these games came to modern systems, came to systems later, but they're still, you know, Soul Calibur is still best played on Dreamcast. Soul Reaver never really got a port beyond Dreamcast and PC, and Dreamcast is still the best way to play Soul Reaver. Um, Loads of games like Shadow Man, I think, is probably still best played on Dreamcast. So the list goes on and on and on and on and on. So yeah, I mean that's another reason why this console just still lives so largely in people's hearts. And
yeah.
if
And
moving on, yeah, sorry, go on. Before we do
no,
move on,
just no, it's fine. Just one other point as well. I think the thing that stands out about Dreamcast as well is that it did its best work and it shone the best, ironically, when it tried not to do games that were on Saturn. Not a lot
yeah,
of Saturn franchises came over. And as much as we'd have loved to have seen, like a Knights, for example, come over, apart from like maybe like your arcade follow-ups, like your VFs and your Sega Rallies and your Virtual On's, House of the Deads, in the main, Dreamcast shone the best, shone the brightest, looked its best when it was doing things tailored for it. It did its own thing, and it is a very different system to the Saturn. Aesthetically, design wise, creativity wise, it's a totally different system. It's got a totally different feel to it, but it's not a detrimental. It's just a different, that kind of term again, that cut off point
yeah.
that Sega tried to do something totally different. So as much as I say, we'd have loved to have seen some Saturn franchises come over, original Saturn franchises like Burning Rangers. Oh man,
Yeah.
yeah. But Dreamcast did its best work, ironically, whenever it tried to not do what Sega had done well on Saturn.
And yeah, that's true. And I think that's true for all Sega consoles. And Sega Lord X has said this a lot of the times in the past that Sega were Dr. Jekyll or Mr. Hyde every generation. You know, you love your Master System, you love Alex Kidd, you love Fantasy Zone, you love all this stuff. Well, guess what? You won't see them on Mega Drive because on the Mega Drive we're all about Sonic the Hedgehog uh, and Streets of Rage and all these Disney games. Do you love those? Tough, because on the Saturn we're bringing all these brand new franchises: your Virtua Fighters, your Daytonas, your Sega Rallies, your Panzer Dragoons. Do you enjoy those? Well, we'll try and bring that over to the Dreamcast, and they did. And obviously, Sonic was successful. I think I said in the House of the Dead review that the House of the Dead on the Dreamcast much better port, beyond amazing how good that port is, and obviously one to one with the arcade original. But the arcade original does not have the magic that the original House of the Dead does for me.
Mm-hmm.
Same as for Virtua Fighter 3 TB. The Virtua Fighter 2 is still the king for me
Mm-hmm.
in arcade and at home, and it's nothing to do with the port. It's because Virtua Fighter 3 doesn't kind of have that impact and identity. Aside from the visuals at the time, it doesn't have the impact and identity that Virtua Fighter 2 does. And that's why, yeah, I completely agree with you, mate. Dreamcast was best when it was doing stuff that was brand new, your Crazy Taxis, your Skies of Arcadias, your Fantasy Star Onlines. And I think to an extent that's why Sonic Adventure works so well, because Sega Rally and Virtua Fighter 3 TB and Virtua On were all evolutions of what we'd had with the Saturn. Whereas Sonic Adventure, yes, it shares some DNA with Burning Rangers Nights into Dreams, but in terms, Sonic was completely redesigned and it's just completely fundamentally different game to the
Mm-hmm.
original. So I think that's why it stands alone and is still such a fantastic title in the Dreamcast.
Yeah.
But yeah, but I completely agree. By and large, this was a console that through software forged its own identity and gave everyone who bought into that identity just memories to cherish.
Yeah. aye, as we said at the start of the show, it just has got, as you say, it was many people's first Sega console, many people's first console they bought with their own money. It heralded a transition visually and gameplay wise, innovation wise, that had been unforeseen before. So yeah, it's got tons of hooks for different people.
Yeah. And I think that leads us nicely actually into kind of the community aspect because, and the community side, I think there's the community that was around back then, and this community that was around today, which are two completely different things, but kind of come under the same umbrella of people that love Dreamcast. And I think Dreamcast community back then was your Sega magazine, starting with Sega Saturn magazine, and the way that that was building up to the launch, as we talked about on the
Mhm.
Dreamcast 25 pod. And then you had your DC UK's official Dreamcast magazine. Um, and then you had your online communities as well, which, when I finally got into that, late 2000, early 2001, that was very special. And even though you were talking to people through, I didn't have a voice communicator, I didn't have C-Man, I didn't have anything like, I didn't have the microphone. But talking over chat and using the text bubbles and PSO, or the keyboard if you had one, you did feel this sense of, I'm playing with other people, and there's other people that are enjoying this console as much as I am now.
Mhm.
And gaming, I know a lot of people look down on their noses at gaming, on online gaming now, and you get people that are like, "Oh, single player only," blah blah blah. But there was something special and something revolutionary then about then. You're not the only Dreamcast fan. Of course, there were more people own Dreamcast than the Saturn, of course. But then you saw beyond your mates, you saw beyond the other people that were playing it. There was
Mhm.
this whole world out there that was connected. And I think that, along with the magazines, just felt this, again, this Dreamcast culture that was going through. And I think that was a big part of it.
Yeah, the initial period, like even in the UK, the initial period, you did feel the buzz for it. It felt, in a way, it was, obviously we had our Japanese systems at the time, so we've been enjoying it. But watching the kind of build up to the UK launch, there was a slight tinge of not regret because you're happy to see it doing well, but you'd wish the Saturn had been able to garner that much because it was a real buzz around Dreamcast, but there was a price point. You had already been getting glimpses of the games. There was tournaments held up and down the country. I've mentioned the HMV tournament. There was heats held in every HMV across the UK. On Sega Rally 2, the final was held in London. I think the winner got, I can't remember, was it a console and like a year's supply of games or something like that? It was a brilliant, brilliant prize for it. So that Sega were doing all the kind of right things. We're getting it out into the kind of community, into the public, raising awareness of it, showing what it could do, championing the capabilities. And as I say, it was just a real buzz and a hype around it that you just never felt with the Saturn. But again, that's because Saturn was just snuck out the door,
Yeah.
But the Sega made sure they made noise about this system. They made sure people could not miss it. Whether it
Yeah.
was in, lads mags had adverts for it, national newspapers had adverts for it. It was on the side of bus stops. That blue swirl, you you couldn't miss it at one point. And obviously they went on to sponsor football teams and things like that as well. So, a very different buzz around it compared to the Saturn.
Even got a starring role pretty much in a South Park episode. Sega Dreamcast.
Uh, I'm going to take my teeth and I'm going to trade them all in for a Sega Dreamcast.
But yeah, I think the big difference between the Saturn and the Dreamcast is you get the feeling that Sega of America were kind of, they were never all in on the Saturn, and I think that was probably a big part of its downfall. Um, Obviously Sega Europe, you never hear much about Sega Europe, but for
Oh,
Sega America, you do get the feeling that they wanted the 32X, and then they wanted something else, and then when the Saturn was out, it kind of, I feel like they kind of thought that they'd get through that and then they jump onto whatever came next. Obviously, it didn't work out like that. But the Dreamcast, everyone was all in on it. Every territory was 100% behind the Dreamcast, And yeah, the fact that it was out in the wild, it was being so heavily promoted that it was on, advertising was everywhere. It was in lads mags, competitions, like you say, the HMV competitions. Um, it was just, and then you combine that with the online, and yeah, the online wasn't there at launch, but when it finally started snowballing and you had all these magazines, etc., you did kind of feel like, the Dreamcast community then was kind of born, and it was something that was exciting to be a part of.
Yeah. As I say, because I never had the PAL machine, like again, my community for Dreamcast was ironically it was Sam again. So as I say, like whenever we spoke to Mel, and Mel was it Nathan was his
Yeah,
his best buddy, and he said he lived, that era with him. They shared so much experiences together. What was similar for me and Sam, because like Sam never imported a Dreamcast, but his cousin Ronnie did shortly, like maybe a couple of months, maybe 3 months or something after I'd got mine. So like Sam was loving it because he could come to mine and play it. And then Ronnie would come up every odd weekend and he'd bring the Dreamcast over. Except I remember him and Ronnie actually bundled their way through the Japanese version of Shenmue. I'm like, how have you managed that? It's like you have no idea what they're saying. It's like
oh dear.
so like community wise, yeah, it was all kind of like online, like kind of like gaming for the CVG forums was a big thing,
Yeah.
in the UK back then. Kind of used to read on there quite a lot and keep up to date with
That's where
stuff.
it kind of, when we're talking about that transition and we're talking about ends and beginnings of eras, and then and then there's another one where it kind of overlaps all of that, isn't it? Where it comes full circle because yeah, that's a great point because all of a sudden you were having those online discussions as well.
Aye, exactly. You were branching out into, and yeah, the birth of the console wars, the stuff you see on Twitter and X today, man. There was some proper vitriol on CVG forums. I'll tell you, between Saturn, PlayStation, and N64 in particular, towards the kind of the 98, 99, there was some slander being flung around at that time. But um, and again, as much as social media kind of, has given birth to that kind of open-ended kind of two-way discussion, multiple-way discussion between gamers to share views, like Dreamcast allowed that. You could visit forums on your browser if you wanted to, but you then had that option of the kind of the voice chat if you had the C-man communicator, or
Mhm.
you're talking to people on Fantasy Star Online. These were real people that you were actually speaking to. It wasn't just people in the shop or in the street. This was real people on the other end of the console you were sitting playing at that time.
Yeah.
Just magic.
And magic indeed, mate. And I think that's what sowed the seeds for, all of that that we've just talked about just sowed the seeds for, what we have and the love that the console gets today. And I think that leads us into the next community part, which brings us into kind of the modern day. And there's just, post live support. Obviously, there was games still coming out for the Dreamcasts well beyond, there was releases in Japan in like 2006, 2008. Is it Border Down, or am I thinking of something else? But there was shoot 'em ups. I can't remember the name of it at the moment. That came onto that came onto the Dreamcast late on, and that's led into you've got the indie games that come to the Dreamcast. You've got projects like Frogballs, fantastic Metal Gear Solid 2 demo, which looks amazing, and then you've got stuff like Dreamcast Live, which it's not the most simple thing to do to get your Dreamcast back online. You kind of need you need a 56K modem, and you need a Raspberry Pi that's got a bunch of stuff soldered into it, and you need a line. I can't remember what it's called, but you need an additional box that will kind of terminate the connection and route it through. Quite complicated. I've not done it myself, but it's fascinating that it exists. They've just
Mm.
announced that Ferrari F355 is now fully playable.
Yeah,
You know,
Daytona 2001 is playable as well, isn't it?
it is. Yeah, they've got 36
Yeah.
supported games on there now, which
Wow.
fantastic. Obviously there's online. I've got the Xbox down there that's been modded to play Xbox Live games. a little bit more straightforward because all you're doing is plugging the Ethernet port in. But the
Yeah.
fact that the fact that the Dreamcast with the technology that it had has been made so that it can still play on the modern day just by connecting these things to your Dreamcast is absolutely phenomenal that that community exists.
Yeah. And things as well, like the mod scene, which isn't quite as vibrant as we're seeing with the Saturn the last maybe 18 months, 2 years has just been crazy. But one of my favorite fan mods is Shenmue Undub,
Yeah,
which allows you to play Shenmue in Japanese with English subtitles, which for me is the more authentic way to play it. I know people like the English dub, but I just think I've always thought that the English dub on it is just it makes it almost B movie like, whereas and now, as I said, I don't understand Japanese or the tone of Japanese or the context of Japanese. So there could be Japanese gamers who listen to the voice acting of the Japanese version that think the exact same thing, but because we are obviously native English speakers, the Japanese just sounds more authentic than what the English voiceover does. But again, they just made wee tweaks like the Coca-Cola branding on the vending machines was
yeah,
removed in the Western version. They've put that back in. So just wee things like that. Cleaned up some of the translations as well, just to make them again more, easier on Western eyes reading it,
yeah,
which is something again that we see happening a lot with Saturn releases, like Kingdom Grand Prix, the video that we've just put out. The English on that, the translation was in there, but Malenko and Bo have went in and translated the translation
yeah,
to make it better. Same again with Shenmue One Dub. So there is like mods out there, software mods as well for the hardware mods. The brilliant open menu for GDMU, which gives a gorgeous front end to GDMU with artwork. We have a beautiful theme. You can have the orange swirl, you can have the blue swirl with the blue Dreamcast writing, the orange Dreamcast writing down the side. Beautiful silhouette of the console in the background of the grid. You can have it as a grid of 9. You can have it big box art with descriptions that tell you how many memory units it takes, what peripherals it supports. Like the fact that people are going out their way to do all this, like how lucky are we,
yeah.
really, that people are taking the time and that we've got people that talented out there that are doing this stuff and it's all free,
Yeah,
you know?
you got translations as well, like the Sakura Wars translations.
Mm-hmm.
You got the upcoming translation. I know it's in progress of Sega Gaga. Rent a Hero got a translation.
Sega Gaga, mate. Oh, just please give me that game. Like, just like Derek Pascarella's said several times, just be patient. It is coming, but it's a big undertaking. But oh man, just I've tried to play that using Google's Translate camera, and it's just not happening.
Yeah,
But I really that's one game that whenever that eventually gets dropped, translation, I will be locking myself away if possible to play it because God knows how long I've wanted to play that game.
yeah, same, the same. But it's amazing that all this stuff exists. The same as in much the same as in that this stuff exists on the Saturn and the Mega Drive. The fact that people have this console is so beloved and people are making this content for it just screams just how much beloved it has, how beloved it is. And you've got new content coming for it as well, new games as well. Obviously, there's been a fair few games that there's games that have been made specifically for the Dreamcast, and then there's been games that have been ported from to the Dreamcast. So I think Xenocrisis got a port to the Dreamcast, possibly the best way to play it. And it's you see the release and it gets all those. You've got like the Dreamcast that you can buy the Japanese or the Power style cases, and
Mm-hmm.
that stuff's really impressive as well. And there is a thriving indie scene in there, and I think we've said this, to each other. So a lot of the time, you see people saying that the Dreamcast embodies the spirit of the indie scene,
Mm-hmm.
and for me, I think it's back to front. You know, the
Yeah.
Dreamcast didn't embody the indie scene because the Dreamcast, when that was released, was cutting edge technology. This was a
Yep.
console that was, Sega said it would be the most powerful console for years to come. This was a console that was meant to be more powerful than Model 3. So it was never designed as an indie machine. But what I feel is the reason why people feel that way is because these indie games channel the spirit of the Dreamcast, channel the spirit of kind of Sega's design ethics. If you look at stuff like C Smash, you know, Cosmic Smash was a, you know, running on Naomi, great arcade game. You know, the fact that C Smash channels the Sega feel, it doesn't channel. You see what I mean? This isn't the Dreamcast doesn't channel the indie spirit. Indie games channel the spirit of the Dreamcast, and I think it's that way round.
Yeah. Aye, it's like try the most diplomatic way to word this. It's like, yeah, the Dreamcast, as you said, it came out at the time, it was cutting edge technology. It was beyond anything that the arcades could possibly do at times. It was all about Model 3. The hype around it was Model 3. So what the Dreamcast has done is inspire young people at the time who have gone on to become developers or indie developers, and it's had a strong influence on them. So yeah, they're then applying the influence of the Dreamcast on them, but
Yeah,
at the same time, that shouldn't then allow the Dreamcast to retrospectively be referred to as an indie console, because I think it is important to remember what Dreamcast was and what it tried to do.
yeah.
And as great as it is, and you see things, games coming out, and I've been quite vocal on it. There's some games on there like I love 2D games. Saturn is renowned for 2D. I still play tons of 2D games. Mega Drive is always on, but you know, I just think it kind of belies what the Dreamcast can do when you're porting NES style side scrolling platformers. Like we're seeing the Saturn get opened up, Unreal running on it, the amazing homebrew stuff that we're seeing going on. I would just love to see someone, whether it's just if one developer can't do it, just maybe if they can group together, like we see again on the Saturn, people collaborate to do great work. Let's try and open this box up. Because I still say that there's untapped potential. And no, I'm not a developer. I'm not a programmer. I wouldn't dare try and tell people how to do these things. But I don't know if the SDK is hard to get their hands on. Is it hard to understand? Is it hard to open up to utilize? But you've got to think that there's more capability in what the Dreamcast can do. This was the most 3D focused machine Sega ever made. So powerful. It birthed Naomi. This is how powerful this box was. There's got to be more that it can offer the community than NES style 2D platformers. And yeah, it's amazing to see new games coming out and these indie games that we see getting championed, time and again that the Dreamcast is, it's the machine that won't die and it lives on. It doesn't just live on through indie. It lives on through the memories of people who maybe imported it like us, who got it because of Shenmue, and that was their first experience of it. Just there's so many ways that people came to the Dreamcast. I think it's important that the machine does indeed. It's the legend will never die, as they say, but it's not just because of the indie scene. It's because of what Dreamcast wanted to do, tried to do, did do in the 2.5 years that it was with us, and the legacy that those games and those experiences left for the decades to follow.
Yes, absolutely, mate. I mean, the Dreamcast was just sheer, unadulterated ambition from Sega at the time,
And
from the
fun, just
and
fun,
just
you
fun.
know.
Yeah, and just the sheer scope of what Sega were trying to accomplish with all the innovations that they brought to the table, which we talked about earlier, with Shenmue, which at the time was the most expensive game ever developed and was just broke entirely new ground that games hadn't spoken before, seen before, and was in many ways it was the game that it was a glimpse of the future. You know, the fact that it rivaled, not it exceeded the arcade and rivaled the top end PC hardware at the time. I mean, you look at and I was reading about the graphics chip the other day in the Dreamcast, the GPU, and you know the Xbox Series X and the PS5 when they got announced, it was like these are the equivalent of the last gen AMD graphics cards. Apart from they'll support the layers RDNA 2.0 or whatever, or maybe I think the PlayStation was RDNA 1.0, which was then again it was the last gen graphics card. But the Dreamcast, the PowerVR 2 chipset they used at the time the Dreamcast came out, that hadn't been released. It
Exactly.
was, you know, which is unprecedented when you think about it today. That doesn't happen. The Switch used what was at the time a 2 or 3 year old mobile chipset. You
Yep.
know, the Dreamcast was using top of the line graphics card. Like, there was the competition between 3DFX and PowerVR. Which one were they going to use? They went with PowerVR in the end, and that chipset didn't become available at retail until after the Dreamcast had launched. So this was a little box that was shooting for the stars with content that was, it wasn't just, innovative because it was a couple of people in a bedroom, they decided, let's make a video game. We've got a shoestring budget and we're going to try something a little bit different. This was, pretty much the equivalent of a AAA internal studio, Smile Bit, Wow Entertainment, Hitmaker, AM2, they were all big studios, which,
Hmm.
these were big studios which were contributing to these. And yeah, the ideas that they had were audacious. They were different. They were things that we weren't seeing anywhere else. But that doesn't mean that they were indie. They were, and that's why you get the feeling that the indie scene is inspired. So, and maybe that is the Dreamcast legacy, that the Dreamcast has inspired so many people to make games in that vein that are creative and colorful and, as you say, mate, fun.
Yep. Yeah. And just what you were saying about the Power VR2 chipset as well being so ahead, you know, it was so ahead and so advanced and wasn't available to retail and so cutting edge at the time that, they had a shortage.
Yeah.
That's why, like NEC couldn't make enough of them. And that's why Sega estimated they could have sold it was an extra between 300,000 and 500,000. They reckon they could have sold, but
Yeah.
they just couldn't make the chips. There was that cutting edge. There wasn't. They just weren't able to make enough of them. So I again just mental. To think that it was that ahead using technology that just wasn't publicly available. But yeah, just that kind of final point you made there. Dreamcast has undoubtedly inspired those who grew up with it, who have went on to become creators. And as I say, the developers you mentioned there, the teams within Sega, your Hitmakers, your Smile Bits, they weren't indie developers. They were just very talented teams within Sega, but they created the kind of games that inspired people to then go on and make games. And these people have went on to work for smaller studios, indie developers, and whatnot. And in some cases, they are bringing games to the platform that inspired them. So, yeah, the Dreamcast does have a legacy rooted in indie gaming. There's no doubt about that. But let's not forget what it also did. Let's not totally rewrite its narrative as an indie console, for the modern day. Let's remember that it was a powerhouse in its day. Let's remember the innovations in hardware that it made, the games that it brought us that were way ahead of anything. Shenmue, Jet Set Radio. Let's not forget its actual legacy for what it did in its day. We don't need to forget one to champion the other. They can exist hand in hand. It's, as I say, it's just a console that just isn't going to go away. But thankfully, that seems to be the case for all the Sega consoles. Well, three of them anyway. Mega Drive enjoying a renaissance as well with some brilliant community ports, R-Type, Final Fight. There's SNK games coming over. Someone's trying to port Marvel superheroes to the bloody thing. The Saturn, we're seeing so much happening. The Saturn scene's vibrant. The Dreamcast scene, I would just like to see someone just tap into that potential. And I think it will happen. I think someone at some point is going to come away with something on Dreamcast that's going to absolutely blow people's minds whenever they eventually, dig in and get their head round how to really harness that 3D. And I cannot wait for that to happen because I'm confident that it will happen.
You just need a doctor to brace your skull breakthrough.
Mate, we owe that. I mean, I know we're Team Fenrir on here, man, but Dr. Abrasive, like we are Professor Abrasive, sorry, we owe that guy is from the Saturn community, we owe that guy so much that
Yeah,
he's on what we're seeing happening on Saturn the last few years is down to the work he did. You know, just breaking the unbreakable, you know,
yeah.
to think what he did. No, hats off to you, sir.
So to summarize then, mate, I think what we can say is why is the Dreamcast still beloved? Why does it still endure? From top to bottom, it's a full spectrum of things, from the smallest indie game to the biggest online, you know, influence. You know, the way that it influenced modern games, from AAA budgets like Shenmue to the creativity that inspires indie developers and everything in between. The Dreamcast did and does it all. And I think that's probably a fair summary and a fair way to end it.
Yeah, I think you've put it perfectly there, mate. It's just, yeah, if you wanted to go into an actual list, we'd be here for another hour. I just think, yeah, it innovated in hardware, it innovated in software, it tried to bring the cutting edge of technology to the masses at a ridiculously low price point. It had arguably the greatest library of any console in such a short period of time. If you compare any previous generation's 2 years to what Dreamcast did, I don't think anything comes close.
No,
It was a star that burned the brightest for the shortest period of time, but the community and those who lived it and loved it will ensure that it endures for many years to come.
indeed, mate. So, listeners, viewers, hope you've enjoyed us loving the Dreamcast, sharing our thoughts and what we loved about it. And I hope that those of you in the live chat, those of you in the Radio Sega Discord have been sharing your thoughts and memories and views as well. If you'd like more of this content, you know, just let us know through the usual channels. You can get in touch with us via any of the whether it's the comments below, whether it's the Radio Sega Discord. Why not join the Sega Guys Discord? That's a growing and buzzing community in itself. You can catch us on Twitter. You can find me at super_D. You can find James at the Segaholic, although he's not there as much at the time of recording, and you can find the account at Sega Guys. And if you want to be extra awesome, if you want to give us a like and a subscribe, and to go even further, why not become a member with a host of exclusive perks, starting from just 99p, which includes a shout out on the show. So, James, who are our members today that we'd like to give a shout out to?
So, our premium members, we have, starting here, we have I Am Mikowski, we have Stiff Peaks, we have G-Man, we have Sega Saturn Lad, we have Andy Mackey, we have Craig Williamson, who's upgraded from core to premium. Thank you, Craig. And delighted today to announce our latest member is, of course, the Sega Saturn Shiro crew. Our brothers. Thank you very much, guys. And to all our members and subscribers, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, guys. And even if you don't want to be a member or don't want to like and subscribe, why wouldn't you want to like? Have you not enjoyed it? Are you not entertained? But if you've just made it to the end of the video, honestly, thank you so much for staying with us. Love Sega and love your Dreamcast. Stay Sega forever, and we will see you on the Sega side.